What's up, everyone? Ed Blue coming with some more tips and tricks for working with the Helium network. If you look back at my last video, I talked about an introduction to Helium, what it does, and how you can get started. How you can earn crypto, what is it used for, all that kind of stuff. So check that out. In this video, we're going to be talking about the equipment and the installation. We won't go over all the tips, but there will be quite a few that will be pretty helpful. From the very simple, such that you could stop watching this video in basically, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, to the really technical installs if you want to get all the crypto that you can, all the HNT that you can. Those are Helium network tokens. That's what we're doing. And I can tell you from experience, you do these tricks and follow it all the way through, and you can make yourself hundreds of HNT per month. So stay tuned. This is going to be great. All right, so to start off, here is your simple, absolutely simple hotspot. It is just like a router, okay? You're gonna, just like you would set up a router, it's actually probably even a little less complicated than setting up a router. But if you know somebody, if you don't know how to do it, but you know somebody who does, they can set up this device for you. So keep in mind, just like a router, there's a device that you get, and then there's an antenna that goes with it. I actually have the antenna for my hotspot right here. And you can see that it has some yellow bands at the top. I guess that's some coding that makes sure that it is the appropriate frequency for the US. And we'll get into that later. Less technical for right now. All right, first thing is you definitely need some power up to this bad boy. And well, this is just the one for my router. It looks a lot like this. Okay, so just plug in that right into the back of your router. Okay, and you'll take the antenna out of your package and plug it into your hotspot as well. And you just screw it on. I hope you can see that. If you can't, you can look up the pictures. They're pretty easy. This is an RP SMA male antenna. So just keeping that in mind. Okay. Then, and we'll get into more of that later. All right, so you got your power. Remember, it's the LED light bulb. That's about how much it uses. Next, you'll want to set up your Wi-Fi or your Ethernet connection to it. Of course, if you're going to use your Wi-Fi, you'll need your Wi-Fi password. And then, regardless if you're doing Wi-Fi or Ethernet, you may want to consider opening up a port. Now, there's some skeptics out there for if this really matters or not. You can choose whether you want to do it or not. I haven't tried this myself of one way or the other. So I recommend you try it and see what happens. That's the whole thing in this, is just try something, experiment, and see what happens. So if you want to open up a port via your router and do the port forwarding, that is port 44158. And if I'm ever wrong, you can go right to Helium's website and look it up for yourself. If you just type Helium port forwarding, then that will tell you what port you need to open up. Next, you'll need the Helium app, which is on your phone. So you download that bad boy and you can configure the hotspot. And it will take you through all the steps that you need. You remember, you got to sign up with an account. Also, quick aside note there, when you sign up, it's really important that you write down your 12 words, I think it is. Write them down, have somebody double check your spelling, somebody that you trust, and make a couple copies and put them in very safe places. If you've learned anything from about recent headlines in Bitcoin, people have lost these words and lost access to their account, and they try to get them back and they can't. And then they lose all that cryptocurrency and it's poof out the window. You can't get it back. So maybe they'll improve that over time. I know that there's been some requests, but for right now, make sure you're doing your due diligence in keeping that safe. All right, so with the Helium app, you'll go through the add to hotspot, and whether you get it from Helium or a rack miner, or you get it from a place like Emirate, they will have instructions for how you set that up via the app. Last thing on just a simple hotspot setup, you want to place it. Now, the placement needs to be at kind of a 300-meter spacing between hotspots. If you get underneath that, then they start to detect each other and earnings will decrease quite substantially. It's kind of monetized to spread the network and have good coverage. So that's something to keep in mind as you're placing your hotspot or finding locations. Maybe you're just doing this at your home and you have no other option. Just be aware that if you're too close to someone else's hotspot, you're going to butt heads and it will affect both of your earnings. And you can't have multiple hotspots within the same place either. That would also affect your earnings. Other than that, you want it in a window or near a window, and the definite key here is elevation. Elevation, elevation, elevation. The higher you can get that hotspot, the better. It will increase your coverage and your earnings. That's it, really, for a simple hotspot. If you're really trying to amp it up on your just a simple hotspot feature, and you want to make sure that your setup is the best that you can get, you may want to consider things like a UPS. That's in case you lose power. It will keep your power up for a period of time. Surge protector, just in case. It's kind of nice to think about it that way. And then if you really want to, if you're concerned about the security and the port forwarding stuff, maybe a beefy firewall. Thinking about upgrading your router. While this isn't, this is meant to be a very secure device or a pretty secure device. They're doing their best that they can, and it's just always best to figure out how you can have a safe network. And so by beefing up your firewall, you might have some more flexibility there. You can always set up, if you're doing the Wi-Fi setup, you can set it up on a guest network, and then that way it can separate the guest network from anything else on your network. And that's it for your simple hotspot setup. Keep in mind that you may not be able to reach other hotspots with this. I have one set up right now, an additional one that's only making maybe, I think it's been set up for 2 or 3 weeks now, and it's only made maybe 3 HNT, and that's it. And I know it has an antenna, a beefy antenna attached to it, but it's all by itself, and so it doesn't know the difference. So just keep that in mind. You're not going to get much coverage if you're not talking with other hotspots. So for that, let's move on. All right, so let's say that you've done some testing and you're just not hitting another hotspot that's maybe, say, a kilometer away or a mile away, and you think you really should be able to hit it. The stock antenna, as they say, is quite powerful, and they talk that there's a lot of capability with this that many are kind of maybe disregarding. But if you do want to do an antenna inside, which of course will help boost some coverage, again, elevation is key. I'll keep saying that through this antenna portion. Elevation is very, very key. So in boosting your coverage, and while you're taking this antenna off, you unscrew it, and then you put your new antenna on, you want to make sure that you're powering off the device. That's just best practice. I don't know if I guess when I got into this, I did change it with the power still on. It's not the best idea, apparently, from what I've read. So that's something to consider. All right, moving on. Frequency. So each of these antennas has a frequency attached to it that you would go out. And a lot of people just want to feel safe by buying it on Amazon. You can do that. You really got to make sure that you're using the right links and really sound it off with others. I believe for the U.S. market, it's a 915 megahertz frequency antenna, and there I'll say, even with that, you want to make sure that your connectors are right, and you can run into a host of problems with the connectors, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm kind of a fan of the rack antennas that you can get. You just type RAK space antenna, and you'll find I think 3 different versions. There's a 3 dBi, a 5.8 dBi, and an 8 dBi, and I've used the 8 dBis with really good success. So judging from that experience, I would say go for it, but it's totally up to you. With the size, so I was talking about dBi. So that's the different sizing of the antenna. I think the 3D dBi is like kind of maybe this tall, 6 inches maybe. And then there's a 5.8, which is taller, maybe a foot to foot and a half. And then the 8 dBi I'm going to estimate as like maybe 2 feet, maybe 3 feet, somewhere in there. It's sizable, but not too large. There are also other antennas. There's apparently a really good one from Nearson. It's the Nearson 9 something dBi antenna. That's a good one as well. So those are just a host of options. If you type helium antennas and start searching for that, you're gonna get some good advice there. With your cable, so you want from your antenna, if you're upgrading seriously, you're gonna need a different cable. So this one is not going to work for you. There is one that usually comes with the antenna, but maybe not. You could see what comes when your package does, and then make your decision from there. Or you can try and reach out and see who has made those purchases before and what cable they would use. Predominantly, the rack antennas, as far as I know, are N-type male to RP-SMA male. That's the cable that you would want. That's not the end of this. So the rack antenna would be, on the antenna end, would be N-type female, because you need a male cable. And then on the hotspot side, so that's the, if you figure on a router, let me disconnect this antenna here. So that's this part right here. That's going to be your female part. And I don't know what these connectors are on the router, but you can use those to connect up to your hotspot, and that's the RP-SMA male. So that would make it RP-SMA female on the hotspot. And that one is pretty sure. You may want to check again on your antenna that's coming, if you order an antenna that you want it to be, that you want to see what it is. Hopefully there's pictures that will tell you whether it's a N-type female or N-type male connector. Okay? All right. With that, you'll need some. If you make a mistake, you'll definitely want some connectors that will change the type. So if you by chance miss the RP in the RP SMA, like I did, then you'll want a connector to change from SMA, which is what I did, to RP SMA, because that's what you want on the hotspot. So don't make my mistake. Go RP SMA, and then you'll fit right in. That was down for a day and a half, well, 2 days, whatever Prime, as Amazon Prime was, to get it to me. So don't do that. For your connectors, just keep that in mind. You can get a host of connectors on Amazon. You just have to scrutinize whether the thing is male or female and kind of trust that. Look up some pictures, Google as much as you can. Google is definitely your friend. With cable length, if your antenna's inside, you don't really need to worry about it too much. But you do want to consider, even if you're going up into your attic or something like that, your cable length. The longer your cable is, the more a factor there could be for dBi loss, or the more, like if you have a bunch of connectors stacked in a row or something like that, or you're changing it on each end, then that contributes to dBi loss and will affect your ability to provide coverage. Last thing on inside antennas, you'll more than likely, if you're getting a bigger antenna, you'll want to check out the broom holders. So I believe 3M has a broom holder that everybody's been raging about that will help you put your antenna in the window if you're going to put it in the window. So that's it for the inside antenna. Going outside. All right. As my friend Peter likes to say, going bigly. So if you're going to go outside with your antenna, of course, that's going to boost coverage even more. And I guess before I get into that, I did my experimenting. I experimented for 2 weeks in one window and didn't do anything. I moved it to another window that was closest to a hotspot that was like a mile away, and still didn't do anything. Then I ordered an antenna, a bigger antenna, and left it in the window. I didn't do the broom handle thing. Maybe that was my bad. But the broom holder for the antenna. So I didn't do that. Maybe that was why it didn't work. And so that's why when I went, I'm just going to try what it is outside. So I did the work and got it outside. So the key here, just as in when your antenna is inside or your hotspot's inside, even by itself, you want elevation. Elevation is your friend. So you want to get that antenna hopefully above on top of your roof, or above the roof line of other houses in your area. Size, again, it's up to you. You'll want to think about how far you want to reach. How far are the other hotspots from you. With the 8 dBi rack, I've received communications, sent and received anywhere from 1 kilometer, 1 mile away, to I think it was like 25 kilometers, which was I was quite surprised by that, but very impressed. With the type of antenna, now there's lots of antennas out there. One is called omnidirectional, and then the other one is called directional. By and large, for the most part, you want to provide omnidirectional coverage, not just directional coverage. Omnidirectional, think of it, it's in all directions, all the way around you. 360 degrees, sorry. So for your directional, then that would be like if you have a narrow passage that you're I don't know, say a mountain range or something like that. You really want to provide coverage in one area. Or if there's only one hot spot or a road that you want to provide coverage on, that's where a directional antenna would help you. Now, one thing you want to think about related to the size of the antenna is your cone that you're putting out from your antenna. So this isn't something that you attach. It's just the bigger your dBi antenna, then the cone is going to change. So if you think of it like a triangle coming out from your antenna. So here's an antenna. Your triangle is going to come out pretty widely. The smaller the antenna, kind of the more wide it's going to cover. So it's going to go up and down really close, but maybe not out as far. Whereas when you have, I'm just going to compare these because they're bigger. So if this one could maybe go out farther, but its cone shape would be smaller. So it might only be 10 to 15 degrees as opposed to 30 degrees. I'm just making these numbers up. There's actually a really handy chart if you get in the Helium Discord, which I'd really recommend you do, that can help you kind of visualize that. So it's going to be, with the short antenna, your cone may maybe be wider, but if you have the longer antenna, it actually might be not as wide. So we'll go farther, but you might miss some spots that are, if you have it too high, you might miss out on some spots that are real close to you. All right, so that takes care of the cone. Again, your cable. So a lot of people that I've been reading have been using this cable called an LMR 400 cable. They say, well, can I just use RG6? That's common coax. No, you cannot do it. It's not shielded enough. It's not well built enough to do this type of stuff. So you definitely want to look at that, and that's the best. I mean, as far as I understand, that's what I'm making the most HNT off of right now, is an LMR 400 cable. Pay attention to your ends. There is a website if you're in the United States you could probably order these overseas too, I guess. I'm not sure. But USA Coax is the website. That's what they kind of praise in the Helium Discord. So you can go there and get your cable types. You can change which end. It's really useful to use. You can choose on one end, I want this end, and then on the other end, I want that end. So for me, it was N-type male to RPSMA male. And so I chose those, and it's like, do you want to heat shrink these? Well, of course, because if it's going outside, I definitely want to heat shrink them. And then it helps with weather. So then you get your cable, you order it. Now, one thing on that is I've heard them say you can get up to 30 to 40 feet on these cables. They really recommend having them short as possible. It doesn't need to be like 2 feet or something like that, but in that 25-foot range is probably a good length. If it goes shorter, great. So just measure the distance from where your antenna is going to be to where your hotspot is going to end up. And that's the key for the cabling. If you're going to be poking the hole, at least from that LMR 400 cable that I did with the ends crimped as they did from USA Coax, that was about a 1/2-inch hole, I believe, that I put through, that I drilled through the outside of my house to get it inside. If you don't want to do that and you're going to mount your hotspot, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's see here, mast or a mount. If you're going to mount it, you can still jury rig something together to put it outside. A pipe, screwed into a wall of your house or a chimney, or if you don't want to damage anything, you can. I wouldn't recommend doing a cargo strap type setup. If you want to test it and see what works, go ahead, by all means. Make sure you tighten the heck out of it and see what it does from there. Just be careful that you don't damage the fiberglass portion of your antenna. You definitely want to make sure that you're attaching that to something that can be held down, because those fiberglass antennas, if the outside shielding breaks, then you're going to be out of luck and out of money. So if you're going to mast it up on your roof, I would really recommend something that keeps it pretty straight and has some amount of think about the direction. So if you're mounting it, you don't want it to be leaning like this off your roof, and I'm kind of over exaggerating, but I'm doing it on purpose. You want to right that thing so it's straight up and down. Make sure you're using levels. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. And then also, it might be straight from one way, but then you come around to the other side and you're looking at it, and holy cow, it's not lined up. So you want to make sure that in all directions you're at a nice 90-degree setup so that it's pointed straight up. All right, another thing on if you're doing a mast is that and if it is metal, you're definitely going to want to ground that mast. And right away you'll think, oh yeah, lightning, sure. And while that is a definite consideration, you'll definitely also want to be aware of static discharge in the air. So you can get static buildup pretty much any time, and so there's always that kind of latent static electricity in the air that can build up. So you want it to have somewhere it can go. So if you're grounding your mast, that's a good idea. So what I did with that is you just need a grounding clamp that goes on your mast. And I'm not saying the antenna. That's two separate things. So you want a grounding clamp it'll just clamp onto your mast, and then there will be a little screw hole in there that you kind of shove some grounding copper. I used I think it's like a gauge 6 solid copper. If I had to say it was as thick as a thing, I would probably say maybe a little bit thinner than a pencil, or if the hotspot antenna, it's definitely thinner than the hotspot antenna as well. Definitely not as big as your pinky. You definitely would want to use a smaller gauge solid copper. And I did this on our television mast. We have an over-the-air television antenna, and I paid an electrician to do this. This is what they did. So I'm just copying that and going from there. I paid somebody decent money to do it once, and I was like, oh man, I could have done that for like $50 worth of materials myself. So grounding clamp to some gauge 6 approximately solid copper, and then you want it coming down all the way to the grounding rod. If you want to find your grounding rod to your house, that's the best grounding rod. There's also a grounding, like a 4-foot grounding rod that you can get from your local hardware store. They also do the big, whatever, 6-8-foot ones as well. That's to your desire on what you would like to do there. So grounding rod, grounding clamp, and then some solid copper to connect it all together. And that will encourage your setup to have less charge. Now, the next thing that's pretty, at least from what I've seen, people are kind of fanning over it or saying, no, you don't need it. And that's a lightning arrestor. So if the chance happened that lightning struck and you wanted to use that lightning arrestor to prevent damage to your home or to your, to the thing that is hitting, you want to put one of those in. And the recommendation that I saw was to put that as close to where it enters the house as possible. So a lot of people will take their antenna and plug it right into the lightning arrestor. And honestly, that's what I have right now. The best setup is to have it actually close to where you enter the house. So something to consider. That's the best setup. And you'd want to verify that. That's the part that I didn't pay the electrician to do, because I didn't have to worry about that before. And they didn't do the lightning arrestor in the first place, so I was like, nah, I don't know. But that's up to you to make a decision on. If you've got an opinion on it, make your opinion known in the comments, and we'll debate it out there, and we'll prove what's true, and then we'll share that widely. At least everybody will know in the comments. All right, so that takes care of the lightning arrestor. I also saw some recommendations for some UV and weather resistant tape. There's some, again, I think some 3M tape that you can get off Amazon or local store that does both UV protection and also weather resistance, just to protect your connectors. Anything that is connecting externally, you want to run that around. Again, I don't have that yet. I do plan to, probably better when it's warm outside, so that I can make sure I get a nice connection. Lastly, zip ties. You'll want to zip tie the heck out of everything, make everything nice and neat so it doesn't move, doesn't rub around. That will protect your setup in the long run. And then I talked about the levels before. Remember, you want to make sure that it's in all directions, quite straight up in the air. And then if you're using a directional antenna, then you'll definitely want a compass. I wouldn't necessarily recommend the compass that's on your phone, but if you have, if that's all you have, then use the compass app on your phone. So that takes care of your antenna outside. Putting your hotspot outside. This is kind of dicey, but as you may have seen in my previous video, I originally did this. I put my antenna outside, and that is right here. I got a $20 box from Amazon and put it out there. I learned later that you want an IP66 case, because that's going to have the weather resistance that you're looking for. One thing to also be in mind, back to the IP66, that's going to prevent moisture penetration, that kind of stuff. And always look up some information. You may not want to have, like, say, an antenna connected directly to the case. There might want to be some stress relief, because that's a lot of pressure to put on that connector for a box that's maybe not made for that kind of reinforcement. So do look up that kind of information. But the IP66 part, that's your water penetration stuff. Temperature range is another thing to be concerned about. Being more in the northern part of the United States, I was more concerned about the cold temperatures, because it looked like it could get down, to I think it was like minus 30 degrees Celsius, I believe. And so that's a concern. But in my research, when I posted the question online, they said more so the potential is for hot temperatures to get to your hotspot. So just putting it out there. Again, I haven't tested these things. I had it out through the fall and didn't have any problems. I didn't even get any water in that case. Of course, there was probably some moisture that got in there. and over time that could have decayed things, so, or corroded things. So I would really recommend just being thinking about that and what you want to do there. If you live on the coast, I used to work at a job that had a lot of electronic components that were exposed to the elements on the coast, and they would always break down sooner. So if you're on the coast and you're putting your hot spot outside, that's something you should really be aware of, is salt water penetration into your hot spot, into any of the nooks and crannies of your setup that can really corrode things and just make it not as performant. So you may want to budget for that if over time, if you're on the coast. I've seen a lot of people like send out signals for like 100 miles, I think it is, or a long range over the ocean. But you've got to be concerned and considerate of that potential for saltwater penetration. Also, with going outside, you definitely want to consider the wind loads, and maybe considering some guy wires that would reinforce your mast. If you're doing like me and you've got both your helium antenna and also a over-the-air broadcast TV antenna, then you want to probably reinforce that sucker because it's going to have pretty high wind load. And so you may want to look at guy wires. There was a really excellent video that I watched on YouTube about taking those steel cables and figuring out where those loop backs go, or I don't know the terms, but they did it on there. And so it was very educational for buckling everything down. I think the one phrase I remember was you never saddle a dead horse. So if you find that video, you can get a little chuckle out of that. Also, if you're putting your hotspot outside, you're going to need an extension cord. So put that up there. Again, zip ties are your friend, so have a lot of them. That takes care of it. That was at least everything I thought of when I thought about your equipment and install. Again, I'd say the most important points in this are elevation, 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 and then placement, making sure that you're within, or you have space for about 300 meters between hot spots. So if you and a neighbor are getting together and doing something, think about that 300 meter spacing. Maybe you don't want to have that. If you do, then you could bring earnings down. So just something to think about there. And that makes it pretty much done for this video. If there's anything else I'm missing, leave it in the comments. As always, good luck out there mining away, Helium Nation. See you later.